everyone. Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lindsay Lear. I am the Managing Director of Payments and Commerce Market Intelligence, and we're so thrilled to have you here for our analysis and discussion of our latest report that we have partnered with PagSeguro to bring you the most updated numbers and analysis on e-commerce and payments in Latin America. For those of you who know PCMI, you know that this is a topic that we report on almost every year, very close to our hearts. We're always very excited and passionate to bring you the freshest take on what's going on in digital payments in Latin America. And we're thrilled to be collaborating with PagSeguro on this effort, who will be bringing us some very interesting insights from the merchant side, from the PSP side, from the operational side, to give us an even closer look into how this industry and verticals are evolving in 2023 and 2024. So by way of very quick introduction, if you don't know me, my name is Lindsay Lear. I lead Payments and Commerce Market Intelligence. We're the leading market intelligence firm for Latin America, focused exclusively on the payments industry. Been watching and observing the e-commerce market for close to 10 years now, analyzing its evolution year over year. And I'm very pleased and excited to be joined by my dear friend, Caio Costa, Managing Director of PagSeguro. So welcome, Caio.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great to have you here. Great to have all this new study, new information that we can share with the audience. I've been in the payment business for quite some time, working the acquirer side and the issuer side, and now I'm the Managing Director of the international business for PagSeguro. So willing to share with the industry here today all the insights that we have on this study that we made together.
Terrific. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar, the content we'll be presenting today, it was really a summary or a snapshot of the full-length written report that is available for all of you for download. At the end of the webinar, we'll show that QR code so you can download the full report and get access to all of the data that we'll show on the slides today and the full analysis. So please look forward to that. We also really welcome your questions. We love these sessions to be interactive and to have a dialogue as much as possible in this webinar format. So you will see on your toolbar there at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. You're welcome to submit your questions there, and we'll do our best to answer them all by the end of the session. And finally, I just want to say Happy New Year. This is, I think, our first webinar of 2024, so it feels good to be back out in front of our audience. It's almost the end of January, if you can believe it. So I'm so pleased to have you with us, and let's just dive into the content here. Okay, so the question always to start with is, why are we looking at Latin America? Of course, we look at Latin America on a daily basis, but why should this matter to others who are in a global business and developing e-commerce and digital payments around the world? Most of you who are in the region or have followed the region know that Latin America has gone through a spectacular evolution in the past 5 years. When we started really diving into the digital payments in the region, it was barely 50% smartphone penetration, much worse for banking penetration. And I got started in this industry really saying that Latin America is a deeply underbanked region, under-digitized region. And we can really no longer say that. I still hear that narrative jumping around, but when we really look at the numbers, we really look at the digital evolution that the industry has gone through. It's really important to recognize that internet access is over 90% in many of the markets we look at. Smartphone access is over 70% in most of the regions, up until highest of 87% in the markets that we're looking at. And even e-commerce penetration is over 70% in most markets that we're looking at. And we truly have a digitized population, and digital payments have become more ubiquitous than ever. And just as a region as a region overall, we've got over 600 million people, and we have a rapidly a population that is rapidly adopting financial accounts. As I said, we had around 50% penetration back in 2017, boosted to over 80% in 2023, which is a remarkable change. Fastest growing region in terms of account access in the world, of course, boosted by the pandemic. But we've seen that behavior maintain itself and continue to grow thanks to efforts from fintechs, from neobanks, from traditional banks, from digital wallets. In most communities around the region, access to banking is now available, and that has really changed the face of e-commerce, and has been a huge boon to an industry that has had double-digit growth for the past 10 years. And so that's why we every year are so excited to figure out what's going on in the region in e-commerce and stay on top of it, because we have these indicators that keep it really dynamic and exciting. Okay, so diving into e-commerce itself, in 2023, just in the top 6 markets of Latin America, which represent about 80% of the whole continent, we had $479 billion worth of e-commerce volume, expected to reach almost $600 billion this year in 2024, and $870 billion in 2026. And so we're still seeing high growth, the most recently of 27% year over year, and even higher growth in certain markets like Peru and Mexico, where we still have a disproportionately large unbanked population, or population that is becoming banked, becoming digitized. So there's still a long runway for growth. And so that's what I love about Latin America, is every time we look at these data, there's a new growth driver. There's something fresh driving that market forward. And I still get questions, how is it that Latin America is still growing at this aggressive pace of north of 20% a year? And it's because we still have this diversity. We have markets that are very digitally ahead, such as Brazil. We have large markets like Mexico that still have deep pockets of deep cash penetration, laggard digital habits that are expected to change in the short term and continue to boost the market forward. Okay. When we look at the cross-border market, of course, e-commerce is not a monolith. We have many different interesting segments to look at, and the cross-border is one that is interesting to many different types of companies for many reasons. We have been watching the evolution of cross-border e-commerce for many years. We saw it really kind of decline and contract during the pandemic. We saw it recover. And this year, last year in 2023, looking at the full year, we have over $50 billion worth of cross-border volume. And what's interesting about cross-border is that it is growing faster than domestic e-commerce in almost every industry and almost every segment. Why is this? For many years, we've had a lot of increasing supply of cross-border e-commerce. So why is it still continuing to grow? We know that e-commerce is very dependent on exchange rates, and we've seen an improved and strengthening of Latin American exchange rates in most markets in the past year. We have we've seen new payment methods that have opened up new verticals and given international merchants access to new sets of consumers for the first time. And of course, on the international market, Latin Americans get access to products they can't find at home, greater variety, and very often better pricing. So we're still seeing cross-border as a very interesting and a very lucrative market for merchants as a way to expand their revenue and seek new growth markets where maybe they've become mature or the market has become saturated in their home markets. To unpack this just a little bit, we expect cross-border e-commerce to grow at 30% per year, while domestic is growing at 21%. So quite a difference there. If we're trying to make bets on segments of the industry according to growth, cross-border is a great one to look at. We've also got interesting penetration rates. For example, Peru, Chile, and Mexico, open markets with open trade regimes. Of course, Mexico has proximity to the US, really open to cross-border. That's where we're going to see the highest shares among our large markets. Brazil is quite fascinating. We see a lower penetration of cross-border actually, but because of the sheer size of Brazil's domestic market. But by volume, of course, Brazil is the largest in terms of sheer dollar amount. So still under-tapped in many respects, and at the same time, the most interesting market from a volume standpoint. Here we can see what these numbers look like projected out into 2026. And again, we expect cross-border volume to increase in almost every vertical that we're going to look at today. The exceptions are betting and ride hailing. We'll get into those a little bit more in detail later on. Of course, ride hailing is very much a domestic and physically based industry. Betting, we've got some very interesting dynamics that we'll talk about a little later on. But by what we see here is that year over year, by investing in competitive tactics, accepting local payment methods, working with specific payment partners that can help position you. Merchants can look and feel very much like domestic merchants and very successfully compete in the local market. So that's a little bit of why we're here today, to deliver some of those insights at the vertical level and encourage and let you know about the opportunities that are taking place in Latin America for cross-border merchants and PSPs who are trying to penetrate this market and get in on the action that we're continuing to see. Okay, so a bit about payment methods. We're going to go a little bit in depth in payment methods. This is a prime area of the industry that we are continually analyzing, that's changing very quickly year over year. And just some high level observations before we go into too much detail. We still see, even on the global scale, the mix of payment methods is shifting. For a very long time, credit cards and debit cards were the highly dominant payment method in town. And this is changing. This is really starting to change. They are still the dominant payment method when we combine domestic and international credit cards, making up over half of volume. But year over year, this share is declining, and we're seeing the rise of alternative payment methods. And of course, those of you who are following the region know this to be true, especially in Brazil, where we see Pix, the central bank's real-time payment platform. Pix alone representing 17% of the region's e-commerce volume. So very dominant, very interesting, very powerful trend taking place there. And then we also see e-wallets and bank transfers coming in at around 14% of total volume, which is not insignificant whatsoever. And we see these payment methods being increasingly popular among consumers who are new to e-commerce, maybe don't have a credit card, looking for a fast and easy digital mobile-based payment method. And these are becoming increasingly popular in almost every market around the region. So I'm going to pause just for a moment there. We're going to go into more detail around payment methods, but I just want to ask you, Kyle, if you can comment a little bit on these percentages and what changes you've noticed in the past year, or in what changes you might expect this year in how merchants want to think about their payment method strategy, and just kind of get us started off with your opening perceptions.
Yeah, sure. I would say you talked a lot about the digital evolution, right? So what we see in the region is, I would say, first of all, wallets becoming so strong as payment methods, and of course, this is because digital banks increase a lot the penetration in the Latin consumers, right? So this is one of the things that we see really strong. So anything that we will do in the region, we need to consider the key wallets, right? So the movement that we are seeing is checkouts. I mean, every merchant checkout that wants to localize payments in the region needs to consider the major wallets that are being adopted by local Latin consumers. The other thing is Pix, and Pix is amazing payment method. Is just Brazil, but when you look overall, even being just Brazil, represents 70% of the overall Latin e-commerce transactions, which is really strong. And this is also open the eyes of the other countries to see, we need to think about Pix and how we can replicate Pix in our countries. So you see this in Colombia, starting in Colombia with the PSE. We are seeing other conversations with instant payments, even in Mexico. So yes, Pix is definitely an important payment method, the growth was really a tremendous growth, and is already, opened the eyes of the other countries to really, starting this, let's say, the same payment method. Of course, there are different regulatory environments, but this is one of the things. And when we talk about cards, every time we talk about e-commerce, cards are really important, right?
Mhm.
So it's still an important payment method, but one thing that's really important is to differentiate what we call domestic and international cards. I mean, most of the consumers in Latam, they don't have access to international cards. So you need to prepare yourself to have, the local payment provider ready to go for domestic cards. And this is really related to your performance, to your approval rates. Because if you're not prepared for domestic cards, I mean, you're gonna decline a lot of the transactions from your consumers. You're gonna create attrition with your consumers. So, and I mean, it's good to see that we still have cards, but this differentiation between domestic and international is not easy, and it's really important to the payment provider to consider this on their infrastructure. Okay. So,
Absolutely.
and looking ahead, I would say wallets will still grow a lot because the experience of the merchant is really good. So, and of course, instant payment as PIX will still grow and still penetrate in the e-commerce, right? That's what happened in Brazil. That's what will happen in other countries such as Colombia. So we're seeing this trend coming up in the next years.
Mhm. And Kaya, what do you mean when you say for wallets, the merchant experience is very good?
Because the wallets, they first of all they reduce the number of steps in the checkout.
Hmm.
They have, let's say, a cleaner payment flow. So this helps the merchant, helps the consumer to have, let's say, a faster checkout experience and a better checkout experience. And the other thing is, um, they have more information about the client, right? So they
Hmm.
have more behavior information of the client, so which helps also with the approval rates and conversion rates. So it is a payment method that any player needs to take attention. And if you don't have it on your portfolio wallets, probably the coverage for your merchant is not good when you looking for to cover, the 660, 600 million people that are using already wallets with the digital evolution that you mentioned, right?
Correct. Getting more and more, I don't want to say fragmented, but more and more diverse, the payment landscape, more options, more payment methods that people are using on a regular basis. So a little bit more complexity to manage.
Yeah.
I'm going to dive right into our questions because I like to keep us on our toes in that way and be relevant for our audience as much as possible. So very related to this conversation is, what do we think about the payment method buy now, pay later? Kyle, do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, buy now, pay later, it is a tool, important tool. Um, and of course needs it's a feature that needs to be added in any strategy for this year and the next years, right? We see a kind of the same trend in Brazil with the what we call installments with no interest, kind of the same trend. So this is already being observed by other countries such as like Mexico. So if we want to play in the e-commerce world, we're gonna need to look at the buy now pay later. There are different methods to do this, but for
Mhm.
sure this is a key feature if you want to increase sales of your merchants.
Got it. I agree. I think buy now, pay later has been around in Latin America for a long time.
Yeah,
The key to understanding is realizing buy now, pay later. There's many different models for buy now, pay later.
yeah,
Probably this person might be asking about buy now, pay later payment buttons from fintechs, which are still representing a small share of the market. They're still startups. They still have to deal with customer acquisition and merchant acceptance, which are very steep curves to climb. But it brings us to the question of installments, which can represent 50% of e-commerce volume in certain verticals and for certain merchants. So enabling alternative modes of credit continues to be absolutely essential
Yeah,
in,
yeah, for sure.
in most Latin American countries.
And I would say this is related to the size of the ticket, right? When you go to like a travel vertical, you have high tickets, so installments is really crucial to operate. Even in some of the retail, let's say, sub segments. But if you go to gaming or if it's sports gaming, of course, installment's not key to operate, right? So that's why part of our study today is to really highlight needs and the specific needs of each of the verticals, because depending on the vertical, you're going to use different, let's say, set of features or set of tools to really, let's say, serve better the merchants, right?
And you just perfect segue into our next slide. So here you can all observe the expected growth of these different payment methods through the next 2 to 3 years. There you can see buy now, pay later, and meaning specific buy now, pay later buttons from specific fintechs. That doesn't include installments. That doesn't include other type of ecosystem or platform credit. But that helps answer your question a little bit. But you can see the growth trajectories of cards, of real-time payments, of debit, of bank transfers, etc. But important, as we're going to look at our verticals in just a moment, we do observe differences, key differences in payment method behavior across verticals. And you just mentioned one very specifically, highest ticket verticals, travel and retail, where credit cards are still very essential in large part due to the ability to have installments without interest, which vary based on the issuer and the merchant involved. But these continue to be really strategic tools for accessing and creating affordability for Latin American buyers.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can see this a little bit more specifically. There's a lot of data here. Don't worry, everyone. Again, in the white paper, you'll have access to all of these figures in a very detailed way. But we can kind of see some of these differences that we're talking about. You can observe that there's not massive difference across verticals, but there are some things to keep in mind. And one thing that's interesting is that the increase in the share of Pix in the next couple of years, especially in high ticket verticals like travel, this is signaling to us of increasing capabilities across Pix, such as installment payments or the ability to pay with credit over Pix, which is Pix Parcelado, and other innovations coming from the market itself. Also increasing acceptance of Pix. This is something that we can really expect for both cross-border and domestic merchants as well. Okay. So thank you guys. You guys are sending in many questions. We'll kind of tackle them as we go. Some of them are specific to the verticals we're going to go into, so I'll save those for that moment. But and I love one of these questions at the bottom. What new verticals will PagSeguro tackle in 2024? Well, I would say you're at the right webinar. We specifically chose very strategic verticals that are important to the ecosystem overall, and of course where Caio can shed some specific light on what you all are seeing with your merchants, right? So let's go ahead and dive into our verticals here. We have several traditional and more kind of emerging verticals that I think are really interesting and that don't get that much press, so to speak. So just to start off with retail, okay? Retail is the most standard vertical in e-commerce. It's one of the most traditional, one of the most mature, and yet I love retail e-commerce because it is still growing at a 30% rate, faster than almost any other region in the world. Why is this? Retail is so diverse, okay? You have retail really got started with electronics, with technology, with home appliances, with furniture, sort of those large ticket items, but over the years have trickled down into very small ticket accessories, pharmacy, even grocery, and that category continues to get more and more diverse. And so we have seen this continue to grow aggressively and is one of the still is one of the most dynamic and exciting verticals to look at. $258 billion in 2023, exceeding 450 billion by 2026. Brazil and Mexico being very dominant in this area, having the more matured both domestic and e-commerce markets in the region. When we think about cross-border, this is where we can get a little bit granular because it is such a large market. We're able to access numbers to look into that cross-border split by market. You can see, as we mentioned already, who those leaders are. And what's interesting here when we look at cross-border and the domestic market is that one of the primary growth drivers of retail is the expansion of marketplace platforms. This is a trend that almost every standard retailer is moving into a marketplace model. First, retailers moved into e-commerce, and then they moved their e-commerce platforms into a marketplace platform in order to access new sellers, new goods, and enable small businesses and others to leverage that platform. And that's taking place all around the world, and certainly in cross-border merchants who are moving into Latin America, certainly with domestic merchants. And this is what's helping drive that 30% growth rate. And so you have an increasingly diverse and varied availability of products out there. And this is what's helping to drive industry growth overall. So Kaya, what can you share with us about the retail vertical and from a payments perspective? What are the specific capabilities or best practices or tips you can share with merchants who are looking to get into the retail space in Latin America?
What I can say is you touch on a good point, which is what we're seeing is not just the big merchants accessing, let's say, consumers across the globe. So what we're seeing now is small merchants, joining marketplaces that can allow them to connect with consumers all across the globe, right? So the way we see this is small business will increase much more in the next years, and of course, there is some key things to allow the small merchants to have your payment service. First thing is really self-service platform, right? You're not going to be able to attend a small merchant the same way you attend a big merchant, right? So digital self-service platform, so they can go in, log in, and have instant access to their local, let's say, payment methods. The other thing is features there are related to the marketplace, which is split payments. This is one of the things that you need to contemplate on your set of features. Otherwise, they will not be able to operate with the marketplace. So the way we are seeing is part of the retailer with the small business will increase the cross-border, let's say, corridors. And this comes from all over the place, from China to Latin, from US to Latin, from Europe to Latin, and so on. The big ones, I would say, they will play in both fields. They'll play in the cross-border field and also in domestic field. So they have volume to operate locally and to have local operations. They will look not just for cross-border service, but also for domestic process service and banking service. So that's a trend that's happening now. So you look at China or APAC, the big ones are coming down and really having local entities to operate. At the same time, they also operate in cross-border. So it's I would say big two trends, right? Small merchants coming to marketplace, and connecting with consumers, and you need to have really a digital platform to onboard those merchants. In the other side, you have big ones that are creating local entities, and then you're gonna need to serve with both service with domestic processing and also with the cross-border processing. And they are looking for really local strong players that will allow them to use the local banking service. So that I would say that the main retail trends that we're seeing, and now it's happening right now as we are connecting with the retail segment.
Got it. It's a big enough market to enable those two models, the cross-border and then shifting into domestic processing. And so for that reason, it's very compelling to watch how these players move, and provide examples of both. And just a very great clarifying question here from the audience is, what is what is our definition of cross-border here? Fantastic question. When we're talking about cross-border, we're talking about sales, purchases from Latin American consumers to any merchant located outside of their home country. And that might be a travel merchant, it might be a digital good. As long as the merchant is registered and officially located outside the country, that will be considered a cross-border transaction. Okay. All right, so terrific. Let's move on to betting. Betting is a vertical that is getting increasing publicity, I would say, on the global stage and in the payments industry. Little by little, betting, and especially sports betting, is becoming more legitimized. For a long time, this has been seen as a high risk vertical that anyone with a of any reputation would not get involved in. And this is really starting to change, again, with more increasing digital habits and also with regulators signaling to the market that this is increasingly looked upon favorably. This is opening up a lot of opportunity for commerce. And we have increasingly large flows, which are attracting increasingly sophisticated and reputable merchants, as well as tier one payment players to handle these flows. So when we look at the numbers here, it's actually quite interesting. Today, by the end of 2023, we had about just over $20 billion in sales volume in the region. Now, remember, keep these numbers in perspective. Retail was over 250. Here we're at 20 billion for betting. But what's interesting, that's going to more than double in the next 2 years. So this is a rapidly maturing, rapidly changing vertical, growing at 38% overall, driven by certain markets where regulation is changing and encouraging this industry ahead. So it's becoming, it's once stigmatized, now becoming a legitimate business, especially in certain verticals, in particular sports betting in Latin America. So I'm guessing we're going to have several questions about betting. So please do go ahead and bring those. We're seeing, in particular, some very interesting regional differences. Colombia actually has the most mature and robust regulatory framework for betting. It's been fully legalized in Colombia for a number of years. So this is the potentially most mature and stable betting market in the region. We're seeing massive potential ramp up in Brazil, where regulatory changes are taking place, defining the regulatory agenda for betting, and actually encouraging a lot of cross-border merchants to establish local presence and operate locally. So that's a very interesting dynamic in Brazil. Of course, we know Brazilians are very passionate. Esports are already a massive industry in Brazil. And so this is going to, as that regulatory regime becomes defined, we will really see this explode over the next several years. So definitely a vertical we want to be looking at. And Kyle, from a payments perspective, betting is quite interesting because it's very reliant on alternative payment methods, which are their instant nature is very well suited for this vertical. Can you tell us a little bit about that from your experience and how what merchants have learned from operating in Latin America?
Yeah, this is a very interesting vertical, and I would say this vertical and the main players or the main merchants, I would say, or main platforms, they were still being attended by tier two, tier three payment providers, right? And why? Because of the high risk segment. So most of the tier one players didn't enter yet on this segment. But I mean, things are changing. We're seeing like betting platforms coming down. Most of the soccer teams in Latam are being sponsored by the platforms. This is real entertainment vertical for people in Latam.
Hmm.
So, and it's growing really fast. So the way I see it is now with the governments, you know, uh, providing the new regulations, like Brazil, we just had the new regulation coming in this year, and some other countries like Colombia, this will happen. This will happen, and it will be really a new vertical to be explored by tier one players in the payment industry. And the way I see this is what the platforms are looking now is not just about price, it's about performance, but it's also about players that can attend them. Like if I can use the example of Brazil, is they're gonna look for banks for banking service also, not just payment service. So because they're gonna operate locally and they need robust platforms to attend them. So it will be, I see that it will be a shift in this work in terms of what type of payment providers will attend this vertical.
Hmm.
And for sure, there are some specifics because this is really about real-time processing because you have people, betting in seconds, money coming in, the money coming out, and this really need to have a robust platform, a payment platform that will serve them. And of course, they will need more than just the payment service. They will need banking service as they can operate with local entities like in Brazil, right, with the new resolution. So um, I see the industry looking at this and the platforms approaching the tier ones to operate with more robust, let's say, service and more diversified service, not just payment service.
Hmm. Perfect. Absolutely. Terrific. I'm sure there's a few more questions here, so we'll move on, but this is a highly interesting vertical as folks are rapidly trying to understand it more in depth. Um, Moving on to crypto, this is a vertical that we get asked about quite often. Is crypto still an interesting market? Is crypto still something we need to be looking at? And the short answer is yes. When we look at the volumes of crypto of fiat to crypto conversion in Latin America, that's what these numbers are representing here. This crypto went from being an immature market to booming in 2020 and 2021 with the rise of the price of Bitcoin. And of course, we see many countries in Latin America among the top cryptocurrency markets in the world: Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, for many reasons. Uh, a major one of those being unstable currencies and inflation, and wanting to keep money in a more stable asset. Also, perhaps not that much access to interesting investment options, and really using crypto as a speculative instrument for investing. So both on the kind of retail side and institutional side, companies making large transactions in crypto, or speculative and or hobby investors making larger transactions. So we still see this even despite the fall of Bitcoin, of the price of Bitcoin in the bear market that we've been going through. We still see a stable crypto purchasing market. There are still a significant amount of crypto fanatics in the region, and also an increasing interest in stablecoin, Tether, USDC, that are actually increasingly being legitimized for cross-border payments and as a savings mechanism. So that is also driving purchase behavior. Um, at the rate of about $40 billion. So really an interesting vertical to consider. And so, Kyle, what can you tell us about crypto from your perspective, and considering the ups and downs that the industry has gone through in the past couple of years?
Yeah, we talk a little bit about this, right? So the crypto vertical, of course, purchase crypto is one of the things that is really connect with the e-commerce world. So this is one of the things if you want to provide or if you want to capture some of the crypto volume, you need to partner with some local crypto platforms or can allow the consumers to purchase crypto. So this would be, I would say, basic user case to start with crypto vertical, right? What we're still looking at it is how crypto will enter in the merchant checkout. We did not see this yet, but somehow this will come. Of course, this is really attached to to the government and how government treat crypto, right? But this helps us a lot of the emerging markets, like markets that you have hard conversion rates, or if you look at currency, it's hard to convert their currency into some, let's say, strong other currencies. So crypto would help us a lot on this. So the way I see this is more to come. To start is really provide purchase crypto with local partners. So it's a way to learn about
Mhm.
crypto. And of course, there is some movement that will happen to start to include crypto on the checkout. We didn't see this yet on the big merchants, but there are some small middle merchants that will start to see this as an option in a way to capture, let's say, consumer sales.
Perfect. No, thank you for going into that. It was actually an audience question, so that's terrific. Okay. Moving into travel. Travel is just like retail, one of the oldest and most consolidated and most mature verticals in e-commerce. For about several markets, travel, the airlines were the pioneers in e-commerce throughout Latin America. So we've seen, of course, travel got very hard hit during the pandemic. The good news is in 2023, we saw travel around the world fully recovered to 2019 levels, and we will see it continue to grow. So we're at full recovery and putting us now back to where we were pre-pandemic levels and ready for that to continue expanding into new possibilities. So we've got about $60 billion in volume, again, growing to almost 100 billion by 2026, continuing to ramp up in the region. What's also interesting about this is that in the past year, we've seen domestic travel recover more rapidly than international, of course. But last year and now going into 2024, we're seeing international travel finalize its recovery, especially corporate travel. I'm sure many of you are on the line have already returned to your normal travel schedules. We've seen for even through 2022 and 2023, companies not yet fully investing in events and in-person business meetings. And that for the most part has fully gone back to normal. So we can expect travel to continue to accelerate and evolve throughout the year. Now, travel again is, we also see the cross-border share growing aggressively in travel, even faster than the domestic market, once again, because that international component is going to be growing faster. And when you think about the travel industry, it's one of the most mature markets. And so credit cards, higher ticket purchases, installments are really key in this industry. But Kyle, what other capabilities or best practices do merchants need to be considering when thinking about travel in Latin America?
Yeah. Well, as you said, for the retail or travel is a mature vertical, right? So and suffered a lot with the pandemic, let's say years, but is recovering really fast, right? And as we spoke, like this is high ticket vertical. So you need to guarantee that you have installments. You need to guarantee that your processing transaction for credit cards, because credit cards is still the main payment method for travel. And this is all related to your fraud system, fraud protection, because at the same time that comes a lot of volume, there is chargebacks here. So you need to control really well your operation and really to have, let's say, efficient fraud system to operate in a really profitable way, I would say. Why? Because this vertical generates a lot of volume. They have low margin. At the same time, they require low take rates. But if you're not control chargebacks, you can have a problem as a payment provider, right?
Mhm.
So in addition to this, there are some specifics like pre-authorization, 3DS. There are some specifics of the industry, of the payment industry, in features that you need to embed on your processing platform. Otherwise, you will not be able to serve the travel vertical. This vertical is being served by the main global, let's say, payment providers, but they are also looking always for a second provider. They don't play just
Mhm.
with one provider, so they always operate with one, two, or three providers. So there is always a chance, if you show to them that you have performance, you have a good set of products and solutions, you to capture some volume of them, right? So, and of course, this is part of you having a relationship with the consumers, because consumers, high-end consumers, use a lot e-commerce to buy airline tickets, hotels, and so on, right?
That's a great point about the merchants looking, platforms looking for redundancy. Travel isn't necessarily a vertical where you're having a whole lot of new merchants coming in all the time. So it may seem very highly competitive and difficult to serve that vertical. But if you can compete and improve authorization rates and fraud, you're going to attract some demand.
Yeah, for sure, for sure,
Absolutely.
for sure.
Okay. Terrific. Okay. Moving into streaming. Streaming is one of these verticals that very quickly seemed to become almost mature, right? Mega popular, especially during the pandemic. Streaming platforms are reasonably affordable for almost anyone. We have habits of sharing accounts so that even more families and individuals can like get access to streaming. During the pandemic, there was almost an oversaturation of streaming platforms among households. And because of their low ticket nature, streaming platforms have really been a digital gateway for many underbanked families and households around the region. So an extremely popular, extremely successful vertical, growing a little bit more slowly than other verticals simply because we have that high rate of saturation, with not only domestic, many international players coming into the market as well as domestic options. Um, so we see a little bit slower growth, exception of a couple of markets like Colombia. Interestingly, we see more rapid growth there. Um, but This continues to be a market that is consolidating a lot of volume and is also the first vertical that we're mentioning here that really depends on recurrence and recurring transactions. Of course, cards are going to be more prevalent in streaming because of that recurring nature, although you do have many interesting models, prepaid models, and models that are based on cash and other alternative payment methods to accommodate. But these streaming tends to be still very dominated by cards. And I'm going to move ahead to gaming, which is a bit similar. But of course, gaming is a little bit more dynamic because it's still nascent in the region. We've seen actually, and there's a full paper that we also conducted with PagSeguro to dive deep into the gaming industry because it is so interesting and new and fresh and rapidly changing in Latin America. A smaller vertical today, but growing, continuing to grow and change. What is driving growth in this region is really mobile gaming and the spreading out of the industry, concentrated among a particular demographic, and that becoming more and more available and accessible to users, light users of gaming, mobile gamers, women, people of all ages are adopting gaming, and so you can dive into that study to get more detail there. But a very interesting market to look at. And I think our last vertical here, and I'll have Kaio kind of make final comments on these verticals as well, is education. And there was a comment about education, so I'm glad that we're touching upon it. This was another vertical that was began to boom during the pandemic, really fueled by the pandemic, particularly master classes and short-term courses, but also higher programs from higher education institutions, full on coursework as well as, bonus classes and small courses offered by these institutions. There's, as it says, there's no limit to what can be taught online. And so this has become a source of true education, of entertainment, of hobbying, that's become really popular. So we see this market almost doubling in the next couple of years. Recurrence is very important, as many folks will have a recurring subscription-based access to online education platforms, and something that we think is still quite nascent and has a lot of opportunity to grow. So we have just about 10 minutes and a lot of questions here, but so Kyle, I just want to ask you to kind of make some final comments on these verticals before we get into our final kind of key takeaways.
Okay. Well, when we look, let's start with the gaming. Gaming is a vertical that we've been playing for quite some time, right? We've been acting for quite some time. It is a classic cross-border vertical, so really simple in a way of how you serve the payment processing. Of course, they're looking for performance, and of course now more payment players are approaching the gaming key companies, right? But they are looking for more than payments. So if you can provide them tools that can generate more consumers and more users or more players, this is one of the things they're looking at. So this is key when you are a payment provider and you also have that like a digital bank. If you can use your digital bank uh, portfolio to generate more users or more players for the gaming platforms, that they what they're looking for. So it's a kind of how you mix your value proposition to the gaming world. Um, they will still grow as we see the numbers, and they will keep on the cross-border side. It's really different than what is happening in betting, what is happening in retail, which is companies coming down to have local entities. On the streaming, we see streaming as I would say mature vertical. I would say kind of the same comments that we have for travel. Still a room to be second or third payment provider if you're not going to be the first one. So it's still room to capture volume. But of course, what the streaming platforms are looking for is performance, and performance in a way that you not you will guarantee hassle free for their card holders or their user in terms of changing the credit card numbers. So your platform needs to be really ready for reducing the attrition with their existing clients, right? And online education it still needs to be explored. Wasn't explored yet by the payment, let's say, cross-border players. So it's still to be explored. It's a good growth. Recurring is key for this, of course, the same way that's key for streaming. Uh, but I don't. I see still an opportunity in this vertical for the payment providers to explore more and to serve better these platforms. Some of them are cross Latam, which is good. So you can have, the umbrella of Latam to serve them. So coverage is important, and of course, localized payment is also important. When you look at to domestic credit cards, the penetration of domestic credit cards. So this online education needs to have players that have, good service on with domestic credit card transactions. So that'll be my comments about this. Let's say three last verticals, and I see really that um, and part of the study that we're doing is to really give to the industry, the payment industry, more details about each one because they are very different when we compare each other, right? So they are very different in the way how you approach the merchant and which type of feature or tool you offer to them.
What I hear you saying over and over, Kyle, is performance, right? And this is kind of a new element to talk about in Latin American e-commerce. Of course, performance has always been important, but we're reaching a level of sophistication and competitiveness in the market where it sounds like performance is more important than ever. And also taking this verticalized approach as you just said, making sure you have the right capabilities in each vertical and really understanding how they're operating has become more strategic than ever.
Yeah. What I would say is that the industry, the cross-border, was approached by the industry, which kind of one size fits all. But
Mm-hmm.
this is the change is happening already. So the same way you approach a retail company is very different than how you approach a travel company. The needs are different. And one thing that you point out is performance. Every one of them are looking for performance. If you don't have performance, they don't even want to see your proposal.
Yeah.
So, and this is why, because this guarantees consumer hassle free, so you don't have attrition with the consumer and increase of sales. So really, this consumer will come back and will, buy more service and more goods
Right.
from you.
Lifetime value. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. So as we kind of wrap up, I just want to touch on a couple of final trends here to summarize our comments here. I think a key trend or a key fact that we can't miss is that this region continues to move nonstop. We can never become complacent. We've seen the payments space accelerate faster than ever in Latin America and around the world, change faster than ever, new payment methods, new verticals, new regulations. So staying on top of that and really understanding what's going on in the local market continues to be really essential. Cross-border is a key market for growth. As we said, cross-border is growing faster in every vertical and every area than domestic payments. So fascinating space to stay connected despite increasing competition, we've got an increasing pie to be going over. Um, Digitization occurring also in payments. We've seen this very strongly in Brazil, and we will continue to see it taking place in different formats and different ways, shapes, and forms across the region. We have a very digitized consumer, and payments are coming along, keeping pace with that digitization. And then new verticals taking stage. We've been looking at e-commerce for years now, and it's the first time we've had such diversity of verticals when it comes to gaming, betting, crypto, and some of these other areas that are really kind of new opportunity areas for PSPs and merchants looking to compete in these areas that are a little bit less competitive, new, growing very quickly, and representing really interesting new revenue opportunities. So these are a bit of the key, just to nail home the key trends here. And we're going to get to, Kyle, your last remarks and a couple of more questions. And while we do that, I want to put this QR code up so that you can have plenty of time to scan that, download the white paper, and make sure that you get all of this data that you can pore over and study on your own and take in on your own time. So Kyle, as and just by the way, we're going to stay a few minutes longer just to answer some of the questions that you all have asked. But before we hit that hour mark, Kyle, just tell us your final remarks, kind of final maybe predictions for 2024. We understand what's happened up till now, and what do you think are the key areas we need to be looking at this year?
I would say new verticals are coming, like betting that we highlighted. So it's a vertical that will not just require cross-border but domestic. So I think one thing that's really important to consider when we look to cross-border is you have to have also the domestic service in place, right? Why is that? Because big players will not just serve us with cross-border transaction, they also will have local entities and serve a domestic transaction. So this is an important thing to consider because the market is evolving, right? The other thing is one size fits all does not work anymore. So you really need to understand the specifics of each vertical and how you're gonna use the your tools or your features to better serve each of the verticals, right?
Mhm.
And I would say that strong players in LATAM, if they have beyond payment service, if they have banking service, if they have media service, if they can give to these merchants access to consumers, this will empower them in terms of value proposition, right? So
Mhm.
it's a more complex thing than just serving merchants and e-commerce processing payment service. Not just about that. This is, I would say, is like the commodity, but how you add more value to what you
Mm.
provide in terms of service, right? So this is
I really
really a
like that
change.
perspective.
Yeah,
Payments becoming increasingly, uh, the thing that everyone offers. So how are you going to add value and what kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
relationships are you going to be
yeah,
generating? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, perfect.
And and the other thing I would say is, of course, digital is there. So the Latin is the digital evolution happening and is happening. So new payment methods beyond cards, wallets, this is all that's going to happen. Pix will be, let's say, exported by the other countries in the
Mhm.
same way because of the instantly way that Pix works, and these are things that will start to happen in the other countries, right? There is a lot of opportunity, like in countries like Mexico, not just in payments, but with remittances.
Mm.
There's also a lot of opportunities to US Latin, Europe Latin, or APAC to Latin. There are other let's say, corridors here. And the last point I would say is small merchants. They
Mm.
will access cross-border. They will access cross-border because it's a way to have more sales, is a way to access more consumers. But you need to be prepared with the digital self-service platform. If you don't have digital self-service platform, you're not going to be able to capture these small merchants.
Mhm.
So a lot of things going on. I think it's a great time for the industry and cross. I mean, the world is really connecting merchants and consumers all over the place. So a great opportunity for the payment industry to capture more and more volume as we see the growth numbers that we presented here, right?
Well, thank you. Great summary. And I think, you got the wheels turning in terms of new verticals and new opportunities. And I just want to we are over time. If you're still with us, we still got over 100 folks dialed in. So I'm gonna just take a few more minutes and go through some of our questions. We've kind of delivered a great summary of what's going on in the region, and I really like to hear what you all have top of mind. So, Kyle, you spoke a lot about Pix just now, and the growth of real-time payments we've seen around the world. And is the question here is Pix cannibalizing debit cards? If yes, what is the impact on payment acquirers? I can speak to that from a purely data standpoint. When we look at, it's hard to know if Pix is actually cannibalizing debit. However, when we look at the data, the pure Pix data, if we look at just the vertical of Pix transactions of representing consumer purchases to merchants or person to business purchases, that volume has now exceeded debit card volume in Brazil as of the end of last year. And we've actually seen debit card volume fall. So that would indicate that there is some cannibalization happening. Although Pix is also, especially in e-commerce, Pix is capturing new incremental volume that cards would never capture. Um, and debit in Brazil has never been fully enabled. And so in the e-commerce vertical, it's probably not cannibalizing debit because debit has never been very, very dominant, had to have a very large market share, but it is capturing massive incremental spend. So that's what we see from a data perspective. But Kyle, I'd love to hear your perspective on the ground.
Well, I see two or three dimensions, right? When first of all is the consumer, let's say the buyer experience, right? If you have a really strong and fluid experience with Pix, of course, this will capture some volume of the debit cards, right? So this will happen, right? The other thing is, and this is happening right now. I mean, the experience on the e-commerce for Pix is equal or better than the debit cards, right?
Mhm.
So the second piece is cost. So Pix has much lower cost than debit cards. So, I mean, when you start to compete and you see like verticals looking for, and when I talk about performance, it's not just approval rates, conversion rates, but merchants are looking to reduce the cost of payment processing. So if Pix
Absolutely.
is really cheaper than debit cards, this will drive not just it will drive merchants to uh, put Pix as a primary payment method on their checkout. And if the experience is good, why not? So you combine both things. So I would say from what we are seeing in Brazil is that Pix, and the number shows this, right? So the Pix will capture and is capturing right now part of the volume debit for sure.
Perfect. Perfect. And another alternative payment method question. This is a great kind of clarifying question that I think you can tackle, Kaio. Are e-wallets available for cross-border e-commerce, or are they only limited to domestic transactions?
So what we do is, I would say part of them are, part of them are not. So that's the part of the work that we do, right? So what we do is we translate local settlement to international settlement, right? So we do part of this. That's why it's important to connect to a provider that can localize payments for you, right? So there is two models. One that is really cross-border transaction from the start, and the other model which starts with domestic, then we do all let's say the translation to the cross-border settlement, right? So there are the two ways that we operate.
Mhm. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go to just one more question here. I think this is kind of an interesting question to consider. I'm not sure, Kaio, if you have a prepared response. But thinking about new verticals and new evolutions of the market, there's an interesting question on B2B segments. Do we think, first of all, what can you tell us about B2B e-commerce in your experience? Is this a vertical you're looking at? Do you expect this to grow? And do they have specific payment methods that are required?
I would say this B2B is a really broad, let's say, term, right? When we talk about just B2B. But what I can say to you is one of the things that we're looking at it is remittance, right?
Hmm.
So people or companies paying, like a good example of this is companies paying freelancers or workers all across the globe, right? The other things is companies paying companies, which is more hard to operate because most of uh, this, let's say, vertical is being served by global, let's say, players. Not that the experience are the best ones, but this is attached to the bank, let's say, corporate banking business, right? But this will be, I would say, the challenge for the industry because the companies, the B2B transactions, the companies are look for instant and better service, not just the classic banking corporate service. So I would say that's one of the things that the industry will look at it, and probably in the next year we're going to see some new service coming, right? In terms of companies paying companies, companies paying people, paying person. This is a reality, right? So this is starting with the remittance, and this will be one of the services that the let's say the major payment providers, not even Latin but across the globe, will provide to the companies. We are looking to this, and we're gonna enter in this because this allow us to capture additional volume, and also is let's say a high margin volume because you have
Hmm.
currency conversion, you have um, the need, let's say, from the company to use a single platform because they have a lot of work to do on their side. So if you really solve their problem in terms of, you know, paying their providers all across the globe or their freelancers or their workforce, this will be one thing to capture opportunity to capture volume, right? Besides this, we still seeing fintechs starting to challenge, let's say, the traditional banks in terms of serving company to company B2B, let's say, payments.
Mhm. I do agree it's the next frontier of payments disruption. And like anything with payments, you kind of start in that retail corridor, so digital payouts to individuals. And then that slowly moves up the value chain into small business and into more corporate and B2B overall. So I would agree that there's a lot to see and do still in the B2B space. So great question. Um, so I think that's a great place to close. Thank you all so much for your questions and your engagement. We will be sending around following this webinar the slides and the recording, so you'll be able to watch that playback. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with myself or Kyle for follow-up questions via LinkedIn. We were happy to entertain those follow-up questions and conversations. And again, Kyle, thank you so much. Great to spend some time with you as always and learn from you. And thank you all, and we'll be in touch very soon, I'm sure.